This horror story was told to me by my uncle, Kane. He was a machine repairman at the textile factory in town and often had to inspect machinery at midnight. Because he frequently traveled at night, Uncle Kane encountered many strange things. Today, he promised to tell me a ghost story by the Nine Dragons River. This was something he personally witnessed, and even recalling it now still fills him with fear. It happened about 30 years ago, around 9 p.m. Uncle Kane had just finished his shift and was riding his bicycle home. At this hour, the streets should have been deserted, yet from afar, he could hear a commotion and see flashing lights. As he pedaled closer, he saw a large crowd gathered by the riverbank. It was bustling with activity. Both police cars and ambulances were present. He parked his bicycle to the side and squeezed into the crowd to see what had happened. From a distance, Uncle Kane saw doctors trying to resuscitate a woman lying on the ground. The doctors were performing chest compressions, clearly doing their best to save her. From the murmurs around him, Uncle Kane understood that this woman had jumped into the river to end her life. Fortunately, someone passing by had noticed and immediately called an ambulance and the police. But in the end, the doctors gave up and declared her dead. Several people lifted her onto a stretcher, covering her face with a cloth, preparing to transport her to the hospital. As the stretcher passed by Uncle Kane, a sudden gust of wind blew away the cloth covering her face. Not only Uncle Kane, but also the surrounding crowd widened their eyes in astonishment. The woman's face was revealed. Although pale and bloodless, it could not hide the stunning beauty she must have had when she was alive. In that moment, an inappropriate thought flashed through Uncle Kane's mind. He found himself thinking that if he could marry such a beautiful woman, it would be wonderful. After that, the woman's body was taken away, and the crowd gradually dispersed. However, after returning home, Uncle Kane lay restless in bed, unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the pale yet delicate face of the woman appeared in his mind, haunting him. A week passed, and it was Uncle Kane's turn for the night shift again. When he overheard his colleagues discussing the drowned woman, he immediately joined in to listen. They said that the woman had jumped into the river after being abandoned by her boyfriend. They had been deeply in love for many years, but in pursuit of an opportunity to go abroad, the man had quickly married someone else. Betrayed, the woman fell into deep depression. Unable to bear the pain, she took her own life. His colleagues also mentioned that ever since that night, whenever someone passed by that section of the river, they would often see a woman sitting by the river, crying. Some even claimed to have heard heartbreaking sobs in the dead of night. Some had even seen her terrifying face clearly. People said her resentment was too strong and that she might haunt any unlucky passerby. Gradually, everyone started avoiding that riverside road at night. That day, the factory manager treated everyone to dinner, and they drank a little too much. Worried that Uncle Kane wouldn't be able to get home safely, the manager asked Jack, a security guard, to escort him back. As they neared the river, Jack warned Uncle Kane to take a detour, as strange occurrences had been happening there lately. Uncle Kane scoffed at Jack, mocking him for working in security yet believing in ghosts. Clearly drunk, he ignored the warning and stubbornly pedaled straight ahead. Unable to change Uncle Kane's mind, Jack had no choice but to follow him. As they approached the Nine Dragons River, Uncle Kane felt an eerie cold wind blowing against his back. The wind whistled past his ears, sounding like someone weeping. Thanks to the alcohol, Uncle Kane wasn't scared, but Jack beside him had already turned pale with fear. Uncle Kane tried to ignore the howling wind, but strangely, his bicycle felt heavier with each pedal. Thinking the tire might be deflating, he stopped to check. But the tires were perfectly fine. Jack also knelt down to inspect them, but there was nothing wrong. They had no choice but to continue cycling. However, this time, the bike felt even heavier than before. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, Uncle Cain turned to look behind him. There was a long trail of water stretching from where he had ridden. A chill ran through Uncle Cain's spine, and the alcohol instantly wore off, leaving him completely sober. He realized he had definitely encountered something unnatural. Jack noticed the horror on Uncle Cain's face and called out to him. But Uncle Cain didn't respond. He just pedaled furiously forward, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. At that moment, he suddenly felt a cold, icy breeze rushing to his chest. Looking down, Uncle Cain was horrified to discover a handprint on his chest, a cold, wet mark. Immediately, the coldness from the handprint spread throughout his body, enveloping him in a shivering chill. Even more terrifying, his arms and legs suddenly stiffened, no longer responding to his control. He felt as if an invisible force was controlling the bicycle. It was automatically heading straight toward the river. Uncle Cain exerted all his strength to steer the bicycle, trying to turn the handlebars to avoid plunging into the river. He used all his might to control the handlebars, trying to keep the bicycle running parallel to the riverbank. But just then, when he looked down at the water's surface, he was shocked to discover. In the reflection in the water, a disheveled woman was sitting behind him on the bike. To his surprise, there really was a woman, soaked to the bone, sitting on the back seat. Suddenly, her head twisted sideways, her messy hair parted, revealing a creepy, chilling smile. Uncle Cain's face turned pale, his whole body stiffened, and he completely lost consciousness. The bicycle slid into the river. Jack witnessed the entire scene, momentarily frozen, unable to move. After regaining his senses, Jack immediately rushed to the riverbank. There, he saw that Uncle Cain's head and neck were the only parts above the water. The rest of his body was submerged. At this point, Uncle Cain's face was deathly pale, his mouth frothing, as if he had completely lost consciousness. However, his hands were still gripping the grass on the riverbank, desperately clinging to a glimmer of hope for survival. Jack quickly reached out to pull Uncle Cain up, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't budge him. Uncle Cain continued sinking until even his neck was no longer visible. Jack noticed strange ripples in the water around Uncle Cain, and right in front of him a long strand of hair was floating on the water's surface. That's when he realized the thing below was pulling Uncle Cain down, preventing him from using his strength to pull him up. In panic, Jack quickly grabbed a stone from the shore and threw it forcefully into the water. The figure underwater immediately stopped pulling Uncle Cain. A woman's wet head surfaced from the water. As her upper body emerged, her face and neck were covered in horrifying decayed wounds. She stared at Jack, as if she wanted to devour him alive. Jack, terrified, was paralyzed with fear, closed his eyes, and ran for his life toward the shore. Jack ran for his life back to the town to find help. Breathing heavily, exhausted, he collapsed on the ground, gasping for air and calling for help from passers-by. Later, Jack led a group of people back to the riverbank, only to find Uncle Cain unconscious, collapsed right there. After being rescued and taken home, Uncle Cain remained unconscious for a full day and night, and fell seriously ill. It took a long time for him to gradually recover his health. This strange story tells of a woman who, while returning from her maternal home with her father, encountered a bizarre incident on a deserted mountain road. While walking, a whirlwind suddenly appeared from nowhere, sweeping up sand and dust. The father and daughter had no time to react, only able to stand stunned, watching the strange natural phenomenon. The powerful whirlwind unexpectedly enveloped the woman, pulling her into its vortex. Her father, horrified, screamed, trying to find a way to save his daughter, but was helpless. When the whirlwind dissipated, the woman found her clothes had been blown away. Her father quickly took off his outer garment and draped it over his daughter to cover her nakedness. Returning home, her husband, upon seeing his wife's disheveled state, was extremely surprised and worried, immediately asking about the cause of the strange incident that had just occurred on the road. The father and daughter recounted the entire strange event they encountered on the mountain. After hearing it, the husband became furious, loudly declaring he would go up the mountain the next day to find and kill the demon. Early the next morning, just as the woman awoke, a horrifying scream rang out, signaling that a new tragedy had befallen her small family. She was horrified to discover her husband's head had disappeared sometime during the night. Only his headless, blood-soaked body remained on the bed, a gruesome and painful sight. Her husband's family immediately reported it to the authorities, and the woman was taken to the public court. They accused her of having an affair with another man and conspiring with him to murder her own husband. Before the magistrate, the woman and her father once again painfully recounted the strange story of the whirlwind on the mountain, earnestly begging the magistrate to investigate and clear their names. After hearing this, the magistrate became angry, deeming the father and daughter's story completely absurd and unbelievable. He immediately ordered both of them to be imprisoned pending trial. Unexpectedly, the very next day, another man came to the public court to report a case, begging the magistrate to preside and resolve a strange incident that had just happened to his family. The man, named Wang, recounted that the previous day, while he and his wife were passing through the exact same stretch of road where the father and daughter had encountered trouble, a similar incident had happened to his wife. A whirlwind also unexpectedly rose from nowhere, engulfing Mr. Wang's wife. He could only watch in despair, unable to do anything to help his wife. When the strange wind dissipated, his wife had also vanished without a trace, leaving only her luggage dropped on the ground, causing him extreme fear and sorrow. After hearing Mr. Wang's account, the magistrate began to feel that there was something suspicious and strange about these mysterious disappearances, not merely a random coincidence. The magistrate immediately summoned more soldiers and personally led a team to the mountain road where the strange incidents occurred to investigate and search for clues to uncover the truth. Upon arrival, the magistrate ordered the soldiers to split up and thoroughly search the surrounding area, hoping to discover any remaining traces or suspicious points. Not long after, someone rushed back to report that they had discovered a mysterious cave halfway up the mountain, which seemed to be an important clue. The magistrate and his soldiers cautiously approached the entrance of the newly discovered cave. The surrounding atmosphere became gloomy and eerily silent, signaling something ominous. The brave soldiers, firmly gripping their weapons, slowly advanced into the dark and damp cave, their hearts full of vigilance against unforeseeable dangers. Everyone had heard of mischievous demons, but no one knew their exact appearance. Everyone held their breath, worried, carefully taking step by step deeper into the cave. Deep inside the cave, they only found an empty stone chamber with no sign of any demon. However, there was a small grotto blocked by sturdy iron bars. From behind the iron bars, the faint cries for help of many women echoed. They were imprisoned inside, their faces terrified, begging for help from outside. The magistrate immediately ordered the bailiffs to break down the iron bars and free the pitiful women who were being held captive. Everyone was overjoyed to be free. When questioned, the women all recounted that they had been kidnapped by a demon monk using evil magic and imprisoned here to serve his dark purposes. One of them recounted that this demon monk had the ability to create dark whirlwinds, using them to sweep people into this cave, an incredibly evil magic. The magistrate was still wanting to ask for more details when, outside the cave, sudden noises and chaos erupted, signaling that a stranger had just appeared and was causing trouble. The magistrate turned his head to look out and saw a monk with a shaggy beard fiercely fighting with the soldiers. He was indeed the demon monk the women had just mentioned. Upon seeing the monk, the magistrate immediately recognized him as the culprit demon monk. He then ordered his bailiffs to capture him at all costs. Unexpectedly, this demon monk was not only proficient in evil magic, but also possessed very high martial arts skills, causing the bailiffs great difficulty in subduing him. Everyone had to exert great effort, joining forces to finally subdue and capture the ferocious demon monk, ending his cruel acts. The demon monk was tightly bound and brought before the magistrate. The magistrate angrily berated him for daring to use evil magic to harm the common people within his jurisdiction. Through interrogation, the demon monk admitted to using evil magic to kidnap women and murder many people. However, he adamantly refused to reveal where he had learned those dark arts. Finally, he was sentenced to beheading. After the demon monk was executed, the mountain road where the mysterious disappearances once occurred returned to peace. The people no longer had to fear strange winds and the mischief of demons. This strange story begins. On a typical day, a wealthy landowner was supervising his workers harvesting wheat. He urged them to hurry before nightfall. The tenant farmers worked without rest, threshing and bagging the grain right in the fields. A bountiful harvest was the fruit of a years-long labor. After harvesting, the grain was loaded onto carts to be transported home. Every year during this season, thieves often took advantage of the darkness to run rampant. The landowner held a spear for guarding, urging the workers to quickly transport the first load of grain home before it got completely dark. As night fell, he sat leaning against a haystack, guarding the remaining grain alone, waiting for the workers to return for the second trip. While resting, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps on dry straw. He silently thought, "Sure enough, a thief has come." He quickly gripped the spear in his hand and sat bolt upright. Before him, a pair of unusually large, bare feet were approaching. When he saw the approaching figure clearly, the landowner's face immediately changed color, his eyes wide with extreme terror. The visitor was not human, but a giant demon, with blazing red hair and fur bearing its fangs and claws, its appearance incredibly ferocious. As the demon lunged, the landowner quickly used his spear to stab it, wounding it and causing it to roar in pain. The demon let out an earth-shattering roar, its sound echoing like a clap of thunder in the dead of the silent night. Wounded, the demon did not attack further, but turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness, leaving the landowner trembling. Not daring to stay, the landowner fled for his life. Midway, he was fortunate enough to encounter the workers who were returning. He quickly stopped them, frantically telling them to return home immediately, warning that staying would be life-threatening. Upon returning home, he was still in shock. His wife advised him to rest, but he insisted on going back to the fields, fearing the workers would be wasteful. The next morning, despite the danger, the landowner went back to the fields to continue supervising his unfinished harvest. While everyone was working, a roar like thunder again echoed from afar, heralding the return of the vicious demon. Knowing the demon had returned, the landowner shouted in panic, urging everyone to flee quickly to save their lives. His wife advised him to abandon the remaining grain, but he was reluctant to part with his property, arguing it was money, the fruit of a year's labor that could not be abandoned. Determined not to give up, he bought bows and arrows to arm his workers. He promised a large reward to anyone who could kill the demon. The next day, they went to the fields again. One group harvested, while another group stood guard with bows and arrows, ready to deal with the demon. As expected, the demon appeared once again. It loomed towards the field, its target unchanged. Seeing the demon, the landowner immediately ordered everyone to draw their bows. He shouted loudly, demanding they shoot their arrows immediately. Countless arrows flew towards the demon, sticking all over its body. However, it seemed largely unharmed. Hit by arrows, the demon once again fled. For the next 3 days, it did not appear, temporarily putting everyone at ease. After the harvest was complete, the landowner stood on a haystack, announcing he would hold a feast to reward everyone for their hard work. But just at that moment, the demon suddenly appeared from behind, grabbing the landowner, to the astonishment and terror of everyone. It bent down and bit hard into the landowner's head. Everything happened too quickly. No one could react in time to save him. After biting the landowner to death, the demon transformed into a plume of black smoke and vanished into the air, leaving behind a soulless corpse. When the workers took him down, he was already dead. No one knew where the demon came from or why it was so determined to kill him.
The main character of the story was Anton, a dealer who went to the mountain alone that year to import medicinal herbs. He arrived in Damgon village, which was located deep in the mountains and had extremely inconvenient traffic. This was a location that produced high-quality medicinal herbs, but due to transportation issues, very few people came to pick up the goods. As a result, the price of medicinal herbs was quite low here, and it met Anton's criteria. The people here were very welcoming, and when Anton arrived from elsewhere to buy medicinal herbs, the village chief immediately exhorted the people in the village to arrange for him to stay. It only took them a few minutes to find an empty house in the village for Anton to rest. Not only that, the village chief also requested that his wife prepared a lavish dinner for him. The village chief then quickly left. When he arrived at the gate, he abruptly turned his head and told Anton not to go out at night. The village chief's statement piqued everyone's interest. Anton, on the other hand, didn't think much of it, quickly packing his bags and eating dinner. After a long day, Anton dozed off as soon as he sat down on the bed. The countryside, particularly in the mountains, had a very quiet atmosphere. The cool breeze also caused Anton to fall asleep gradually. He had no idea that something horrible was about to happen to him. At exactly midnight, a woman's pitiful cry could be heard from outside, and that sound jolted Anton awake. Despite the low volume, the cry created a sense of anxiety and insecurity in the listener. Anton stood up and wanted to go outside to see what was going on. The crying could clearly be heard coming from the courtyard, but when Anton went outside, there was no one there and the crying ceased. He was about to return to the house to sleep when he heard another cry from the back of the house. The cry was sad, but also spooky and strange. After going around the house, Anton came to a halt in front of the yard's corner, where a well was located. At the time, there was a woman crying on the edge of the well. Anton couldn't see the woman's face clearly because it was dark and she had her back turned, but her crying was heartbreaking. Anton, moved by pity, approached slowly to inquire about her story and console the poor girl. However, Anton was taken aback when he placed his hand on the woman's shoulder because the woman's body was extremely cold. The woman turned her head with a ghostly smile before Anton could react. Her face was haggard and pale, and her eyes were deep, and she didn't appear to be a regular person. Anton was afraid to scream loudly, so he turned to flee, but the woman caught him by the wrist. Due to the ghost's control, Anton was so terrified that his face turned pale and he felt a sharp pain in his wrist, the ghost's hand hooking into his skin. Anton jumped up, realizing it was all a dream. As a result of the intense pain, his face was still filled with fear at this point. Anton tried to remain calm and reassure himself that this nightmare could have been caused by being overtired. At the same time, Anton felt a sharp pain in his wrist, looked up and saw 5 black fingerprints. In the dream, he was also grabbed by the witch's arm. However, when Anton looked around, he was astounded to see that the door was open and that some footprints stretched from the bed to the floor. Convinced that there was a thief in the house, Anton quickly glanced at the money bag next to him, which remained in the same position without moving. So who left a trace? Despite his fear, Anton was still curious about this to find out what had happened. He followed the trail of black footprints. As he walked behind the house, a gloomy atmosphere began to emerge. Anton's heart began to have a bad premonition as well. There was a well in front of Anton now, just like in a dream, except there was no ghost sitting on the well's wall and no ghostly cry. Anton had a feeling what he had just witnessed was more than a nightmare. Everything had to be related to the well in front of him. So Anton summoned his courage to walk towards the well, then placed his hand on the well wall and crawled inside to investigate. Anton saw nothing but dense water at the bottom of the well. The water surface, on the other hand, was constantly rippled as if something was about to happen. Just as Anton was about to return inside, a figure in the water appeared out of nowhere. If you looked closely, you could see that it was a woman's silhouette. When he saw the terrible scene in front of him, Anton's face darkened instantly. He screamed in fear and then backed away slowly due to inertia. When he stayed back, he ran into someone, quickly turned around, and Anton recognized the person was the village chief. The village chief's appearance at this moment was like Anton's savior. Anton hurriedly informed the village chief of his dream of a ghost and followed her in their footsteps to the strange well. Anton was then reassured by the village chief and led into the house. The chief began to tell him a story after he had calmed down. 7 years ago, a merchant who purchased medicinal herbs came to the village and was warmly welcomed. He was able to purchase medicinal herbs from the villagers at a reasonable price. However, after he left, everyone discovered that the money they had received was all counterfeit. Pam was one of the people who sold him medicinal herbs. He didn't want to be screwed after 2 years of hard work collecting herbs, so he went to the merchant's house to get his money back. However, 3 years had passed and Pam had not returned. When the villagers learned that he had died in a foreign land, Pam's wife couldn't take it any longer and jumped into the well to commit suicide. When the village chief finished telling the story, Anton felt a pang of sympathy, but no less fear. So the woman he met in his dream had to be Pam's wife. Suddenly, the village chief pulled a wooden stick from his belt, and a few villagers with knives and sticks burst in through the door, asking Anton to let them check his bag. Anton immediately refused, but the villagers eventually subdued him. A villager handed over his money bag to the village chief. When the village chief and some young men took the money from Anton's bag, they discovered it was all counterfeit. When his deception was exposed, Anton began to cry, pleading with the villagers to spare him. Of course, the villagers were unconcerned by his words. They despised scammers because of what happened to them 7 years ago. The village chief was the most enraged because he was Pam's father. He swung his wooden stick angrily at Anton, imagining his son being murdered by scammers. Anton was hit in the head with a stick before he could react. The stick immediately struck his head, splattering blood everywhere. In fear, Anton begged the village chief, but he was now completely transformed into a different person. He approached Anton slowly by an enraged expression. It appeared that the village chief was attempting to avenge his son by killing all of the scammers. He raised his stick again and struck Anton hard on the head. After being knocked unconscious, Anton was ruthlessly thrown off the cliff by the villagers. Anton miraculously avoided death. He then reported the incident to the police and was sentenced to prison for using counterfeit money. Those people who were with murder plots in Damgon village were also punished by law.
This horror story tells of a strange encounter between two worlds. My grandmother's family had 3 sons. The youngest son was 14 years younger than me, and I often played with him when I was a child. We had a very good relationship. When my youngest uncle was 26, he fell in love with a teacher from the next village. The two were a perfect match, and before long, they had set a wedding date. At that time, I was on my summer vacation and a bit bored at home. I came up with an idea to ask my mother if I could go and stay at my youngest uncle's house. My youngest uncle loved and cared for me very much. Although he was very busy during that time, whenever he had a spare moment, he would come and play with me for a while. He would also bring out many snacks like melon seeds and chestnuts. He told me to eat them while watching TV. In short, the days at my uncle's house were much more fun than at home. Soon, the wedding day was approaching. The adults became busy with the preparations and no longer had time to look after me, so I was even more free to do as I pleased. On the night before the wedding, the whole family was busy until past 11. My grandmother came inside, looking a bit cross, and scolded me for not being asleep yet. She urged me to go to the bedroom quickly. Because my uncle's house had limited beds, I was sleeping in the same bed with my grandmother during this time. Not long after, my grandmother, having finished her bath, also came in. She lay down beside me, preparing for a good night's sleep after a long, tiring day. However, she had only been in bed for a short while when she suddenly sat bolt upright, as if remembering something incredibly important, looking very rushed. Then, she hurriedly got dressed and went out the door. She didn't say a word, just left quietly, leaving me alone in the dark room. It was the first time I'd seen her act so mysteriously, and I was very curious. After she left, I also got up, wanting to see what was going on. Through the crack of the door, I saw her talking about something with my youngest uncle. They both had smiles on their faces, which made me even more curious. Before long, my grandmother came out with a stack of joss paper. My youngest uncle followed her outside. It seemed they were about to perform some kind of ritual. Afraid of being scolded by my grandmother, I didn't dare to go outside for a better look. I had to quietly crawl back under the covers, but my curiosity was far from satisfied. Not long after, she returned. She had finished her task and was ready for a good sleep after a long, tiring, and busy night. I just heard her let out a long sigh. As she took off her clothes, she muttered something as if talking to someone invisible. At this point, I was no longer sleepy. I turned over and asked her where she had just been and why she was being so mysterious. Seeing that I was still awake, she scolded me. She said sternly, "This is something children don't understand, so don't ask so many questions." Just as she finished speaking, she fell asleep. Soon, the sound of her snoring filled the room. She was in a deep sleep, oblivious to the world. I also felt bored and gradually drifted off to sleep. The night was quiet, and nothing unusual happened. Sometime after midnight, the need to urinate woke me up. I couldn't hold it any longer and had to get up to go to the bathroom. The toilet was in the backyard, but I was closer to the front yard, so, for convenience, I had gotten used to relieving myself in the patch of grass by the front gate. As I crossed the yard, I saw a pile of black ash on the ground. The sight made me feel a little strange and uneasy. I didn't pay it much mind, but when I reached the gate, I noticed something else strange. The gate wasn't closed, but left with a small gap. Although there weren't many thieves in the countryside, my grandmother usually closed the gate before sleeping, but since I had to go so badly, I didn't care much anymore. As I was relieving myself, I felt that the night was particularly cold. It was summer, and while it gets cooler after midnight, this was a bone-chilling cold, like winter. After I finished, I hurried back to my room. As I entered the yard, I closed the gate behind me, which made me feel much more at ease. As I passed through the living room, just for a split second, I thought I saw something, a white shadow flashing by, too fast to see clearly. It was a white blur, and it wasn't in my direct line of sight. It was something that seemed to just flash in the corner of my eye. I looked all around, but there was nothing unusual. The room was empty, without a single soul, filled with an eerie silence. But I didn't give up, because I was certain. In that instant, something had indeed entered my field of vision. There was no mistake. As I walked, I finally saw that white thing again. It had reappeared before me, no longer just a flicker. Moreover, I didn't see it directly, but through a mirror hanging on the wall, an incredibly strange and ghostly sight. Through the mirror, a person was sitting in the old Grandmaster chair in the house, but the person was somewhat ethereal, and in the dark environment, they seemed to emit a faint glow. I didn't recognize his face, yet there was a sense of familiarity. Strangely, however, he seemed completely unaware of my presence. I then looked at the actual Grandmaster chair across from the mirror, based on its position in the reflection. But the chair itself was empty. There was no one there. At that moment, I understood what was happening. It was an undeniable truth. I had encountered a ghost. However, in that instant, I wasn't very scared. I only had two thoughts. One, this person would not harm me, and two, I should try my best not to disturb them. With these two thoughts in mind, I deliberately took a wide berth. I walked towards the bedroom, treading carefully, not wanting to startle the spirit. But when I got to the bedroom, I had a change of heart. I went to the bedside and shook my grandmother awake, hoping she could help me. Seeing that I was still awake, she got a little angry. She asked, "What time is it?" Why aren't you asleep? Don't you know we have a lot to do tomorrow?" I stammered that I had just gone to the bathroom in the yard. I didn't know how to explain, so I could only lie clumsily. Before I could finish, she turned over and went back to sleep. "If you're done, then go back to sleep. What are you waking me up for?" she said. Of course, I couldn't let it go. I said, "Grandma, when I was coming back from the bathroom, I saw a person in the mirror." Then I changed my mind and didn't want to say more. Since I had seen it through the mirror, but not in reality, perhaps it wasn't a person. Maybe it was a ghost. Hearing me say that, my grandmother finally sat up. She couldn't hide her surprise and asked, "What did you say? Did you see a ghost?" I quietly nodded. I recalled the person I had seen, an old man whom I had never met, yet who felt strangely familiar. At that moment, Grandma suddenly became animated and even muttered to herself. She said, "The old man arrived so quickly. This is a happy occasion." I was completely bewildered. I didn't expect her not to be scared. She was even grinning from ear to ear. She asked, "Was that old man in the mirror?" She looked at me, her gaze much gentler. She asked, "Was that old man wearing a dark purple shirt, grey pants, and black shoes?" Since I had just seen him, I immediately recalled the old man's image from my memory. Sure enough, it matched her description perfectly. Grandma smiled, her eyes looking towards the living room. She said, "That person is your maternal grandfather. When he passed away, you were only 3, so you have no impression of him at all." Now, as I recalled the scene from before, it made sense why I wasn't scared at all and even felt a strange sense of closeness. At this point, my grandmother recounted the story of going to find my uncle earlier. She said that before going to bed, she had gone to find him to burn joss paper for his grandfather. It turned out, last night, she suddenly remembered. For such a joyous occasion as a younger son's wedding, they had forgotten to burn joss paper to invite her grandfather to the wedding celebration. That was truly improper. So, the two of them hurriedly burned the paper in the yard. They hoped that their grandfather would receive the invitation and come to celebrate with the family. And leaving a crack in the gate was actually to make it convenient for my grandfather to enter the house, a very thoughtful gesture from my grandmother. However, even she hadn't expected my grandfather to arrive so quickly. It seemed that he had been dearly anticipating his youngest son's wedding. As she spoke, her eyes welled up with tears. The memory of her grandfather had moved her to the point where she could no longer hold back. At this point, I naively told my grandmother to go out and see my grandfather. I didn't know that humans and ghosts were different and could no longer meet. Grandma didn't scold me. She just gave a sad smile and said that in a few more years she would go to visit my grandfather, but for now she wouldn't disturb him. Then she pulled me into an embrace. She said that for now she couldn't bear to leave her naughty grandson, which made me feel very warm. After that night, I didn't think much more about my grandfather. Everything had passed, leaving only beautiful memories in my heart. However, in the years that followed, I often remembered the scene from that night. It was a very special and meaningful memory that could never be erased from my mind. I always wondered why my grandfather only appeared in the mirror, and why he just sat there quietly, seemingly unaware of my presence. As I grew older, I gradually came up with an answer. The world my grandfather inhabited and this world of ours were unrelated. Moreover, his way of life and thought was far different from this world. Perhaps the world he was in only existed within that mirror. And as for why he appeared that night, perhaps it was because he had received a summons from some force. And my encounter with him was a fateful one, something that cannot be explained.
A peaceful village suddenly became more bustling because of a strange case. Boss Liu Feng and Captain Chow were also notified and quickly showed up. When they arrived at the scene, they met the policeman at the village and heard everything again. The victim was a boy who was only 13 years old, and according to the policeman, this area frequently had similar murders lately. Boss Liu Feng also inquired more carefully whether these murders were the result of robbery or if they were being investigated for other reasons. However, nothing was suspicious. No property was stolen, the children died in the same manner, and the villagers often said it to be the result of evil magic. As soon as he said it, both of them were whisked away to the victim's home, which also served as the crime scene. Leader and Boss Liu Feng were both taken aback by the victim's dead posture, which was out of the ordinary. The strangest thing was that the dumbbells are tied to the child's hands, which begs the question of why the perpetrator did the same, and the child's posture was also extremely strange. After observation, Boss Liu Feng also said that for some reason it related to the cause of the perpetrator's crime, because the dumbbell was possibly the perpetrator deliberately tying it to the ground and not wanting it to be tied to the child's hands. Boss Liu Feng decided to focus his investigation on the dumbbell. After careful examination, Boss Liu Feng ordered the boy's body to be brought down for further examination. The boy's body was slowly taken down, and there was no sign of any suspicion. Captain Chow approached and intended to examine the boy's insides, and after unbuttoning the boy's shirt, another strange thing appeared. Captain Chow hurriedly reported to his boss to see for himself. Both Boss Liu Feng and everyone present, after seeing the incident, were also very curious and a bit surprised. Underneath the shirt were some female overalls, which rural women usually wore as a bra. So why was this boy wearing it like that? The police chief of this area did not care much about the question. He said that due to the boy's gender, he dressed like that. But Boss Liu Feng didn't think so. He thought that all the strange things in a case were suspicious, couldn't be subjective. And after a scene inspection was completed, Boss Liu Feng ordered the boy's body to be returned to headquarters so that the forensic examination could be more thoroughly examined. The local police officer also followed along to the headquarters in order to investigate the case together, and everyone quickly returned so that the forensic analysts could soon examine the body. In the car, Boss Liu Feng asked about the previous cases, and was told by the police that the cases were very similar to how the crime was committed. And that police officer claimed it was because the children's families were members of a cult, which was causing all these problems. But Boss Liu Feng disagreed, and he said it was definitely an individual's cause, and blamed the police for taking the case lightly and didn't examine the scene carefully. Any case would have its cause, and it was impossible to unjustly blame anyone without fully investigating everything. Immediately the car returned to the headquarters. The forensic also had long-awaited orders. But the local police insisted that there was nothing in the small village for the perpetrator to commit the crime. Chief Liu Feng did not want to argue with him, so he had just asked them to hurry to the forensic room and listen to the forensic judgment. The forensic room at Headquarters 703 was the most highly specialized forensic room in the entire organization. When they arrived, the forensic side was also nearing the end of the initial diagnosis. The policeman did not seem to believe what Chief Lu Feng said, so he was eager to learn the results. The forensic team discovered numerous suspicious items on the victim's body. Chief Lu Feng discovered many suspicious points as well, but he asked the forensic to speak carefully again to ensure that what he discovered was correct. Forensic examination had pointed out many singularities on the victim. The holes and the facial expressions of the victim was the most suspicious of all. On the victim's head, there was a hole, like a nail, and it seemed that when the boy died, the killer proceeded to crucify the boy's forehead. The boy's face was very pale and his eyes had dark circles, not as dead as reported. At this moment, the policeman did not want to be said to be irresponsible, so he protested that the boy had just died this morning. The forehead's injury has been caused by the boy who fell before his death. But the forensic insisted that the wound was caused by a nail stabbing, and according to autopsy, the boy had died a day earlier and was only hung up today. After hearing the forensic's judgment, the policeman expressed fear of being reprimanded, so sweat was pouring out of him. But Boss Lu Feng never reprimanded him and asked more about the boy's family situation recently. At this time, the other policeman reported that the boy's family had been going back to his hometown for 3 days and that the boy was alone at home. After hearing all the clues, Boss Lu Feng guessed that the camisole was not by accident. It certainly had something hidden behind it. And the dumbbell, there was definitely a mystery in the way of killing. This case wasn't simple. According to the subordinates, all of the children killed in the area were roughly the same age. So based on all the clues, this was definitely a serial murder case. But why kill these children? They had nothing to take advantage of. Their family was also very poor, so what was the point of killing them? With the police's suspicions, Boss Lu Feng became enraged, believed that all deaths had cause and that nothing was meaningless. After being blamed, the police took the serious action to investigate the incident and together with Boss Lu Feng summarized the location of the murder and the perpetrator's general method of committing the crime. Finally, Boss Lu Feng ordered Captain Chow to quickly open a meeting with all the police in charge of the case. And the boss also ordered all the policemen in the area to attend this meeting. He wanted to coordinate to resolve the murder soon. After just over an hour, all gathered at the headquarters, waiting for Chief Chow to preside over the emergency meeting. He has prepared a map of the area where the recent murders happened. And all cases had one thing in common. It was that they were all about a month apart, and the victims were boys aged 13 to 15 years old. When the perpetrator commits the crime, they would dress the victim in women's clothing. And the crime points were not far apart. The perpetrator was likely to be in the central area, and the culprit was definitely only one person, and according to judgment, he would not be able to move far after causing such crimes, at least until next month. So it should make it easy to localize the area where the culprit was hiding. Because of the professionalism of the 703 investigation team, all the policemen in that area felt very awe-inspiring and delighted that they would quickly catch the killer. Boss Lu Feng immediately ordered the dispatch of the investigation squad, led by Captain Chow. After multiple investigations and ransackings, there was only one house that remained suspicious. All were consistent with those mysterious cases, so Captain Chow reported to Boss Lu Feng that the gun was used to enter the house. Not waiting for Captain Chow to finish his words, Boss Lu Feng was ready to raid, unable to let the suspect escape. Captain Chow and some of his teammates ambushed from behind. The back door was a tall, sturdy wooden door, but it was easily breakable as they went inside. There was a large courtyard inside, so they hid outside to observe the situation. After a while, without any movement inside, they immediately rushed in, and inside there was only one strangely dressed cloaked person sitting in front of an altar. He still turned his face calmly as if he didn't know what was going on. An old man looked old, his face wrinkled but frightening. Suddenly he jumped up and dashed away. He was moving so quickly that Captain Chow couldn't even catch up with him, but he hadn't gone far when he heard Chief Lu Feng's voice from the front yard. The suspicious man was apprehended in the front yard by Boss Lu Feng and his teammates after being rushed out. Captain Chow quickly removed his cloak to get a better look at his face, only to discover that he was in his mid-20s but appeared extremely old. Chief Lu Feng ordered an investigation into him. When he arrived at headquarters, he gradually revealed the heinous things he had done. During the interrogation, he appeared strange. He didn't act like a normal person. He claimed to be practicing a lifelong technique and that by killing 10 children, he could gather enough souls to do so. Wearing female clothing to increase the spirit of the soul, and after death, the soul would be held by dumbbells, unable to escape, and he would come to capture those souls. When he heard the murderer's sick words, Boss Lu Feng became enraged and ordered him detained immediately. Finally, the case would be closed as Captain Chow gathered all of the case documents. He returned them to Chief Lu Feng and gave them to the area police chief to keep on file in that area. He wanted them to keep it safe and to remember that every case required the police to focus their attention on it before it could be solved quickly. When Boss Lu Feng and Captain Chow left, he felt that humans were too cruel and that evil magic must be completely eradicated. Another mysterious case was closed, and the burden became heavier.
Two years ago, for the convenience of work, I moved to live in an apartment near my company. That afternoon, after coming home from work, I sat on the living room sofa and watched TV, as usual. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. At that moment, I thought I heard wrong, or the people outside knocked on the wrong house, because I did not know anyone in this apartment complex. But then the knock on the door continued. The outsiders claimed they were the police. I was very confused. Why are the police looking for me? When I opened the door, it was true. There were two policemen standing in front of me. They said they wanted to get some information from me to assist with an investigation. Although I was surprised, I quickly regained my composure and agreed to the police's suggestion. Very quickly, the policeman pulled out a photo of this woman from his pocket. He asked if I had met this person. The woman in the photo also lived in this apartment and has been missing for many days. I told them I didn't know the woman. Then they told me the woman in the picture was missing. After that, they greeted me and continued to knock on each door to ask about the whereabouts of this woman. The police did not specify why she went missing and how long she had been missing for, but I didn't care much about this either. A few days later, I seemed to have forgotten this, until one night. That night, with overtime, I came home late and was about to get into the shower. It was 11 p.m. I know that taking a bath at night is not good, but if I don't take a bath, I can't sleep. This time of night is the most relaxing time for me. I let my hair down freely and bent over to wash it. The strands of hair flutter in front of my eyes, but enough for me to see the void ahead through my hair. And then suddenly, I saw a pair of bare feet standing in front of me. I am sure my heart stopped beating for a moment. Feeling scared, I immediately raised my head. I reached to close the running tap. Every hair on my body was standing up. Looking around once more, I gradually calmed down. I thought maybe I was seeing things. It was just an illusion. But then, a thought flashed in my mind. I gradually felt the surrounding air become dense and colder. To prove that what I was thinking was just bullshit, I decided to try it again. I slowly lowered my head and glanced over the hairs in front of me. This time, no longer barefoot, standing in front of me was a woman with shoulder-length hair and her hands hanging down. I panicked and shouted, then fell on the floor. The woman disappeared once again. I reached out for the towel and hurried to cover myself, then ran out of the bathroom fast. Until I lay on the bed, I was still trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep because I was still so scared. After that night, I no longer dared to bathe at home. I have a colleague who was single, and she was very happy to help me with this. The strange thing was that while at her house, nothing happened to me. My colleague assured me that it was just the new apartment that made me feel this way. I also hoped that everything would be fine. After spending a few days with my colleagues, settling down and feeling my mood regain balance, I returned home. At home, I rarely cook, but I had a habit of boiling water for myself with an electric kettle to drink, rather than ordering the water available in the apartment. Every night, before going to bed, I had a habit of drinking a glass of warm water. This made it easier for me to fall asleep. Indeed, after drinking water, I lay in bed and tried to fall asleep. But for a long while, I felt the air around me was extremely cold. The cold and floating feeling made me feel like I was being immersed in water. Suddenly, I felt short of breath, and my chest felt heavy. Then, I saw a floating object in front of me. I was speechless, unable to realize what it was. As my eyes gradually adjusted, I realized it was the figure of the woman with long, loose hair. The woman was moving closer and closer to me. Right now, I couldn't help but just stare at her with wide eyes. As her face approached me, the feeling of fear grew larger. It was a swollen and slimy face, like a corpse that had been soaked in water for a long time. The patches of skin on her body peeling off and fell into the water disgustingly. The person moved closer, almost on top of me. I was too scared that my hands and feet were stiff, unable to move. I just gasped and stared forward. I shouted out in fear, giving all my strength to try and get out of the situation. When I sat up in the bed, I realized it was just a dream. Even so, until a while later, I still felt terrified, wondering who she was. Why did I see that woman so often? The nightmare made me so anxious the next morning. I dragged my heavy footsteps out of the house warily. Missing notices are posted everywhere in the apartment corridors and staircases. It was an image of a lost woman. I suddenly realized something. How did that monstrous spirit resemble her so much? As I was thinking this, I was about to raise my hand to take a photo to get a closer look, but I suddenly felt scared. Really not wanting to believe it was true, I tried to flip through it to stop thinking about it. When I stepped out of the gate of the apartment building, I saw a group of old women gathered and gossiping. I'd never communicated with them, and neither did they, but it was strange, and when they saw me passing by, a woman took the initiative to call me back. She asked me if there were any strange smells in the drinking water, like a dead mouse. She then asked if I had sleep paralysis lately, or had dreamed of ghosts. Another woman also mentioned the woman who had been missing for many days, all of them seeing her ghost. I was startled to react at this time. It turned out that I was not alone with this problem, and all of these people were like me. All of them doubted that the polluted water had anything to do with her. They must report this to the police. A few hours later, the police arrived. Everyone living in the apartment building was making a fuss. The police were now checking the water tank on the top floor of the apartment building. Something must have happened with the communal pool on the rooftop, for sure. That explains the problems they'd had recently, as well as the stench from the water. After watching the police pick up a body, everyone became extremely scared. After bringing a swollen, rotten body out of the water tank, they continued to use a fishing racket to remove something from the inside. It was scary, because the victim's whole body was decomposed in the water tank. What the police picked up might be the fat and rotting meat. When the police took the body out of the apartment building, everyone could smell a terrible stench that followed. The police also arrested the missing girl's husband and escorted him to the station. A few days later, the case was made public in the newspapers. The real killer was the husband of the missing girl. He killed her and threw her body in the pool terrace on the roof of the building. After everything was cleared up, I was sick for a long time. Every time I think about drinking dead body water, I feel very nauseous.
This horror story is completely true. My girlfriend and I ended up renting a haunted house. This happened in 2010. We rented a room and began our life together, a hopeful new start. We were very poor back then and didn't have many belongings. A few cardboard boxes could hold everything we owned. Life was incredibly simple. Although our life was a bit meager, our love for each other was strong. We were content just to have a place to call our own. The house we rented was in an old apartment complex. The building was old, and the decor was from over a decade ago. Nothing special. Even though we didn't have much, cleaning up was exhausting. After a full day of it, we had finally settled in and begun our new life. Looking back, that time was truly sweet. No matter how simple our life was, we could fall asleep in each other's arms. Our love was very pure. And on the very first morning after we moved in, a strange incident occurred, signaling a series of tragedies to come. When my girlfriend woke up, she was holding her lower back, saying it was very painful. I asked her what was wrong, if she had bumped into something. I thought she might have accidentally hit something while moving. I told her to turn around so I could check. Sure enough, there was a bruise on her back. I asked with concern if she had bumped into something the day before. I helped rub the spot and comforted her, saying I'd go to the pharmacy downstairs to buy a bottle of liniment. A little bit of that and it would be fine. She held her back as she got up to make breakfast. However, after a few steps, she seemed to remember something and let out a terrified scream. I immediately asked her what was wrong. I didn't understand why she looked so frightened and couldn't keep her composure. She said she knew where the bruise on her back came from. It was because she was pushed by someone last night while going to the bathroom. The story was truly hard to believe. She recounted that she had gotten up to go to the bathroom during the night. Everything seemed normal, nothing to worry about. The bathroom door was open. As she approached, someone suddenly walked out of the bathroom. To be more precise, it was a human-shaped shadow, my girlfriend described. The shadow quickly brushed past her. Perhaps feeling she was in the way, it reached out and gave her a rough shove. My girlfriend staggered and nearly fell. Luckily, she managed to grab onto a nearby table. When she turned to look, the shadow was gone. My girlfriend said that at the time, she thought she was just groggy and seeing things. She didn't wake me. She never expected that the spot where she was pushed would actually be bruised. Although she told the story with a clear beginning and end, I simply couldn't believe it. Unless there was a ghost in the house, it had to be that she was just half asleep. However, the matter wasn't so simple. A few days later, my girlfriend got home from work earlier than I did. Since the weather was a bit hot, she went to take a shower. While she was showering, she kept getting the feeling that someone was peeping at her. The feeling sent a chill down her spine. Glancing out of the corner of her eye, she saw a human figure standing outside the shower curtain, watching her. At first, she thought I had come home from work. She called out my name a few times, but got no answer. A sense of unease began to grow. Unable to stand it, she boldly pulled back the shower curtain. She wanted to see who it was, and if it was some kind of pervert. However, there was no one there at all. The room was empty, filled with a terrifying silence. She checked every room in the house. The front door and windows were all securely closed. There was no sign that anyone had entered. And yet, the feeling that someone was in the room with her grew stronger and stronger. The feeling made it impossible for her to relax. After I got home from work, she told me what had happened. She said that while showering today, she had seen that dark shadow again. I didn't pay it much mind. Every time she watched a horror movie, she would be on edge for a few days. I just thought she wasn't used to the new environment yet. In the days that followed, she saw the dark shadow more and more frequently. This kept her in a constant state of anxiety, but I never once saw it. We had been living there for about half a month when she started needing medicine to be able to sleep. Her health began to decline at an alarming rate, and I also underwent a huge change. Of course, at the time, I was completely unaware of these things myself. It was all told to me by her later. My eating habits changed drastically. I started eating foods that I had never eaten before or even hated, but now I found them delicious. In terms of personality and attitude, I also underwent a huge change. I became more irritable and difficult, no longer the gentleman I used to be. According to my girlfriend, at that time, I made her feel like she was with a stranger. I was no longer the person she had fallen in love with. This situation only grew worse. It was as if I had suddenly picked up many bad habits, coming home late, alcohol addiction. I even started hitting her. Hitting a woman was something I had always considered a cowardly act. My girlfriend said that she felt completely hopeless at that time. She didn't understand how her life could have turned into this, her heart filled with pain and sorrow.
However, I wasn't always like that. Sometimes my sanity would return, though I didn't believe the things she said I had done were actually my doing. We had been together for several years and had almost never argued. To stop our relationship from deteriorating further, we decided to go on a trip to unwind. We chose to go to a place with beautiful scenery, hoping it would help us find peace again. We rented a villa by the sea and stayed there. The strange thing was, it was as if nothing bad had ever happened between us. We became as happy as before. She said that I had finally returned to my old self. Hearing her warm and touching words moved me deeply. We talked about it and reviewed everything that had happened before. It made me start to believe that there was really something wrong with that apartment. If that was truly the case, the landlord was despicable. I decided that after we returned, I would find him and demand an explanation if the house was indeed the cause. A week later, we returned to our city. Still feeling a little scared, we didn't go back to the apartment but carefully found a hotel to stay in and arranged to meet the landlord there. As soon as he arrived, he spoke in a perfunctory tone, saying that if there was a problem, a phone call would have been enough and there was no need for such an expensive meeting. Seeing the landlord's fat, greasy appearance, my blood immediately began to boil. He probably saw that I didn't look pleased. I loudly questioned him, asking if there was something wrong with the house he had rented to me. When he heard my question, his expression immediately changed. I could see he had a guilty conscience and didn't dare to look me in the eye. He wanted to make excuses, but I grabbed him by the collar. He thought I was going to hit him and was so scared that he had to tell the truth. Although I was furious, I had no intention of hitting him. I just wanted to avoid trouble and get him to tell the truth, as I didn't want to be deceived any longer. He hung his head and dejectedly recounted the story. 3 years ago, the apartment had also been rented to a married couple. However, the husband was an alcoholic. Every time he got drunk, he would beat his wife until she was black and blue. As a result, his wife couldn't take it anymore and left him for another man. He began to drink day and night. Many days later, neighbors smelled a foul odor and called the police. When they arrived, he had already been dead for several days from alcohol poisoning. Although the death had nothing to do with the landlord, his nice apartment had turned into a haunted house. He had rented it out several times, but the tenants always moved out. Therefore, he even invited a Taoist priest to perform a cleansing. He thought there would be no more problems, so he rented it to us. Who knew things would still happen? The landlord promised to refund all of our rent money. He also bowed repeatedly in apology, hoping we would forgive him, his attitude very sincere. Looking at him, it was clear it wasn't intentional, and he was in a tough spot himself. Besides, pursuing the matter wouldn't lead to anything, so we had to let it go. This incident happened several years ago. My child is in elementary school now, but every time I think back on it, it still sends a chill down my spine.
This story happened in the village where I used to live many years ago. It was a poor village. The story was passed down orally a long time later, and I also heard it from my father. It was an overcast day. A couple was living in the village looking for their child. Both of them had been busy since morning to go to work, so they didn't have time to take care of the baby. The boy always played in front of the yard, but they still hadn't seen him until dinner time that day.
They began searching everywhere from afternoon until late at night because they were worried about their children having bad things. The couple went to every house in the village to ask around. Even the neighbors who had a bad relationship with them, the couple asked, not leaving anyone out. But none of them had seen the boy. At this time, the sky was dark and the hearts of the couple were insecure. Their faces showed concern that their child was maybe in danger. They had lived here for a long time, and they believed that their child couldn't be kidnapped. The couple did not have time to think because there was not too much time left. The couple continued the search. In the village they had found most of them, so they decided to go to the edge of the forest to have a look. As soon past a house at the end of the village, the couple saw the elder man living there. He was disabled in both legs and was in a wheelchair. As soon as the older man saw the couple, he called them over and asked if they were looking for their son. It seemed he had seen the couple's son. As soon as hearing the news about their son, the couple was so overjoyed that they stopped and asked the older man more carefully. But contrary to their joy, what the older man said worried them even more. According to the older man's account, it seemed that the son was led by something. After hearing this, the couple became extremely afraid and their faces gradually turned green. Seeing the couple's panicked expressions, the older man also quickly recounted what he saw. Today, when it was just getting dark, the older man's gambling addict son pushed him to the front porch to enjoy the breeze and then left to play cards. But until evening, his son did not return, so the older man continued to wait on the porch. The village road at this time was also gradually quiet and no longer a shadow of anyone. Suddenly, in that silent space, heavy footsteps sounded from nowhere. Because the road was very deserted and relatively narrow, the footsteps could be heard clearly, which caught the older man's attention. He quickly glanced in the direction of the sound when the shadow of a child appeared faintly in the mist. For some reason, the fog was so thick, it was more like they were surrounding the boy. Because it was dark, the older man couldn't see the child's face. But looking at his appearance and clothes, the older man knew that the child was the couple's son at the top of the village because the child often ran around the village to play. The older man asked, but the boy did not respond, continuing to walk slowly and heavily. The boy didn't look the same as usual. As a person who had lived for many years and had a lot of experience, the older man knew for sure that something was following him. The older man looked down at the boy's feet under the fog. His guess was not wrong. The boy walked, but his feet did not touch the ground. It looked like he was walking on the tip of his toes, looking very strange. But the older man remained calm and called the boy over to talk. After several times of trying to call out to the boy turned, looked at the older man with a scary look on his face. But that scared the older man even more because he knew the boy was no longer aware. The boy's eyes were wide, white, and his face was devoid of any emotion. He stared at the older man, his eyes growing larger and full of veins, his pupils almost disappearing, and his face pale. The older man understood that the boy was no longer a normal human being. Some force was controlling the boy. The older man tried to talk and ask questions to wake the boy, but to no avail. The boy still didn't care and kept walking. The older man felt so dangerous when he saw the boy slowly walk away from the village towards the forest. In the middle of the night, the older man tried his best to call to the boy, but couldn't. When the boy was almost out of the village, the older man saw that there was a figure following behind the boy. It was a man, but the terrible thing was that his clothes were rotten. He was barefoot, and one arm was bare, with only a white skeleton. After hearing the older man kept calling the boy back, the strange man turned and looked directly at the older man. At this point, the older man began to panic because of the strange man's sore face. The pupil of his eye had fallen out and was hanging from his face. His teeth were sharp like a wild animal. It was clear that he was not human. Seeing that the older man was about to call to the boy, he suddenly became angry and turned towards the older man. When he turned around, the older man could see his ulcerated body and only his white bones. It scared the older man so much he almost fell. But after scaring the older man into silence, the strange man continued to walk behind the boy's back and left the village. The older man couldn't walk, so he tried to shout for help, but no one heard. So he sat and waited for someone to pass by the house, and he finally met the couple. After hearing the story, the couple panicked because they couldn't believe their ears. However, the older man insisted that he was not mistaken or lying. The older man asked the couple to go to the forest to find their son. After hearing that, the husband asked the wife to go home to find a lamp to prepare to go to the forest to search. And they quickly ran to call more people to help. After that, the people in the village also gathered to help the couple find their child. They split into groups and rummaged through the forest. But the couple did not rest, but searched all night. But the result was still empty, without a trace of the son. The wife was very heartbroken. The couple could only hug each other and cry, but could not do anything more. They continued to search for another day, but still could not find anything. The next night, because of anxiety, the wife could not sleep. She cried all night because she was worried about her son. She then fell asleep without knowing it. In a reverie, she faintly heard a familiar voice. The voice was getting louder and clearer. It was her son's voice. She suddenly opened her eyes and woke up to see her son standing next to the bed, pale skin and a cold mouth. Seeing her child, she was overjoyed and burst into tears, quickly asking if her son was okay. The boy did not answer but turned his back to the door, still whimpering that he was so cold. Seeing that, the wife also rushed out of bed to run after her child, but the boy went very fast, still unable to keep up. The son was walking faster and faster, so fast that the wife had to run after him, but it was still too late. The shadow of the child was getting farther and further away. After chasing forever, the son led her to an old well. No matter how much his mother cried, the boy didn't care. He headed straight for the well and plunged down. The wife screamed in panic, but her body for some reason became extremely slow, unable to do anything. But the time she got there, her son had jumped into the well. She cried and called the son's name, but below was a deep and dark pit. Then the wife suddenly woke up. It was all just a nightmare. Seeing his wife screaming, the husband woke up and asked her what was going on, only to find his wife crying and sobbing. At this time, the wife also understood that her son was no longer alive. That dream was a foreshadowing. She told her husband the two people were heartbroken. No one said anything else. Then they calmed down and started taking hammers. They headed towards the deserted well. It was an old family well that had been sealed since their parents were alive. No one knew where the key was. But when they saw their child in the dream, they broke the lock and went to the well to check. Above the well's mouth, there was a large and heavy rock, which the son could not lift. In their hearts they wished it was all just a nightmare. The husband began to bring down the rock that covered the mouth of the well. Both of them looked down at the bottom of the well to check, but all was not as they expected. At the bottom, indeed, was the body of the family's young son. Even though the couple was born in a dream and mentally prepared, they still could not accept this cruel truth. They didn't understand how the boy was able to go through the locked door, lift the big rock and jump into the well like that. After that, people also helped them to bring up the body of their son. This story had been passed around a lot in my hometown, but there was no reasonable answer about the son's death. I had a close friend. He was in the same class and also lived near my house. We used to play very well together, going home together after school. Until one day my friend stopped talking to me and went home alone without waiting for me. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't answer me. No matter how many times I called him, he kept silent. It wasn't until I touched his shoulder that he jumped all over, turning to look at me with a listless, panicked face. His face became thinner, more emaciated than before, like it was suffering from some disease. I tried to ask him about it, but he still wouldn't answer any questions. On the contrary, he went straight ahead, silently. His strange attitude confused me. The following day I went to class and saw his mother come to the homeroom teacher to ask him to take a few days off from school. I felt worried about my friend's health, so that afternoon just after school I ran to his house to ask. I went to his house after school. I knocked on the door for a while when his mother opened the door and invited me in. She also said that he was seriously ill. I asked his mother's permission to come into his room to visit him. After receiving the consent, I went straight to my friend's room. I found my friend lying on the bed in the room. His face was clearly worn out. He looked at me with a strange, soulless expression. I pulled up a chair and sat down next to him. As soon as he saw me, he brightened up a bit, but his skin still looked extremely pale. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me he was having a strange problem that kept him awake for many days. I listened to him and became more and more curious, asking what he was all about, why he was so haunted that he couldn't sleep. Until that time, he told me a whole story. A few days ago, he accidentally met a woman on his way home from school. That woman crossed the intersection at the corner of his house but was accidentally hit by a speeding car. After that impact, the injured woman lay in a pool of crimson blood and the car quickly sped forward and disappeared. He was a witness to the end. He also remembered the license plate of the car that caused the accident. Out of curiosity, he ran to see how the woman was. That woman looked up at him with her whole body covered in blood and weak eyes. She whispered to him. The woman used a weak breath and begged him for help. He called the ambulance and the police to help her. But when he saw the woman whose body was covered in blood, with her voice so weak, my friend also guessed that the woman would not survive. Instead of helping the woman, he coldly walked away. He was afraid that if anyone saw him, he would be the one involved in the accident. After that, he left the woman who got into the accident on the road, and he ran as fast as he could home, pretending not to know anything. Since that day, he did not know about the news of the accident anymore, but he encountered some strange phenomena. Since then, his nature also became taciturn and quiet. His parents asked him no matter what he did not bother to answer a single question. His skin became pale and paler. His eyes were black because of staying up all night, and his body was also extremely weak. Every time he came home from school, he locked himself in the house, refusing to eat. He surprised his worried parents. As for himself, after he abandoned that woman, he always had the feeling that someone was watching him, making him extremely afraid. He also didn't know what was wrong with him. Every day the feeling that someone was behind him became bigger. Every night he seemed to have a fever. The whole body became cold and uncomfortable, and the sweat fell non-stop. He kept dreaming over and over again, one nightmare after the other, that made him so haunted and terrified that he didn't dare to sleep again. In the middle of the night, my friend was screaming in fear. His whole body was struggling as if to escape something. His body always felt heavy, as if there were thousands of rocks pressing on him. It was difficult for him to breathe and move. After a while, he felt like he wanted to die, clearly like someone was strangling him. He wanted to ask his parents for help, but every time something happened, he couldn't open his mouth or say anything. After struggling with that uncomfortable feeling, he finally could sleep again. But the strange dream always haunted him. This time, he felt everything very clearly. My friend thought that he was haunted by the psyche after that woman's accident, so he told his story to his mother, making her very confused. At first, he still tried to go to school, but every time he went out, he became tired, frustrated, and didn't want to meet or interact with anyone. Because of that, his learning was also declining day by day. That night, he decided to tell the whole thing to his parents. He thought that he was suffering from psychological problems because he was so obsessed with the accident. After listening to him, his parents did not stop worrying and discussing how to solve his problems. His father reassured him and said he would take him to see a psychologist for treatment and try his best to comfort and coax him. The following night, his father was so worried about him that his father decided to sleep in my friend's room for the sake of checking. But even if there was his father in the room, that nightmare still happened and scared him. In the middle of the night, his father saw him writhing in the bed. His mouth said something not clear, but he seemed very frightened. After a while, he returned to normal, but tears were already pouring down his face and saliva was running down both cheeks. My friend didn't dare to sleep anymore. He was afraid that every time he slept, that terrible nightmare would happen again. "Daddy, help me! The nightmare is so scary!" His father could only reassure his spirit that he could sleep for a while and be healthy to see the doctor. The following day, his father tried to stick around his bed with golden talismans used to calm his spirit and ward off evil spirits. But these talismans did nothing to protect him. That night the nightmare came back, and it was worse than ever. He seemed to have lost all of his soul. He lay stiff on the bed with his cold body, which made his father extremely worried. He finally couldn't take it anymore and went crazy, screaming all the time. His head began to appear in unpleasant pain. His health also deteriorated day by day. His mother was so worried that she cried all of her tears. She tried to do everything to help him, but in the end, she still could not relieve his condition. Meanwhile, his father went to see a psychologist for advice. His father was advised by his doctor to put a CCTV camera in his room for the doctor to monitor. His parents followed the doctor's orders and put a camera in his room that pointed directly at the bed. Every night, his parents monitored him from the monitor connected to the camera to see how he was doing. Unknowingly during that time, his parents discovered the cause that made him like a person who had lost his mind. In the middle of the night, he had another convulsion. But in the monitor, his parents not only saw him writhing in the room alone, but also another person. It was a hazy woman sitting on the bed, with hands clasped around his neck. Very scary. But at this moment, the strange woman discovered that she was being followed by the camera. She turned a bloody and horror face straight into the camera. His parents panicked and rushed to his room to check, but the woman was nowhere to be found, not even a trace. When his father saw this, he worriedly ran to the bed, trying to wake my friend up. After my friend woke up, he couldn't remember anything. He looked at his father bewilderedly and asked what had happened. His father worried that after knowing everything, my friend was even more scared than before. Therefore, his father decided to hide this horror story from him. But then, his father knew that he couldn't hide it for too long. So, the father played the video he filmed in my friend's room for him to see. When the woman's face appeared, my friend immediately recognized it as the woman he had met. His father was surprised and asked him what relationship he had with this strange woman. He sighed and lowered his face. He admitted that he saw the woman in an accident at that time. She begged for his help, but he ran away. His parents then took him to the police to report the accident and learned that the woman did not survive because of too much blood loss. He also thought that part of the fault was because he didn't help the woman, so she died. So that night, he brought the votive paper to burn at the corner of the intersection. This place was where that accident happened. Then he reported to the police the license plate number and the specific time of the incident for the police to investigate. Fortunately, thanks to his testimony, the police caught the culprit of the accident. His health had since also begun to recover.